all of the resources that are shared today. So good morning, good afternoon again. So I'm Dumebi Igbuna. I'm one of the co-founders of Chezi. So folks who might not be familiar with Chezi, we are an ERG management software. So we help folks streamline and analyze or measure, I should say, their ERGs and how they contribute back to their business outcomes. This isn't about our software though. This is our Chezi Connection Week. So in lieu of our annual ERG Summit, we are doing 5 days of programming this week. Each webinar will be from 12 to 1 Eastern time, and it's just a place or a time for practitioners to come together, get some best practices, and hear from subject matter experts like Jes. So for today's session, we are doing the current state of belonging. I think this is the perfect session to kick off Connection Week. Obviously, this year has been, there are lots of words we can use, but this year has been eventful to say the least. So I think this is a really nice session to ground us, see what's happening, what other folks are doing, and share some benchmarking data. So Jes Osrow is the founder of the Rise Journey. They are a DEI consultancy. They help kind of implement organizational change at companies around the world. So I will pass it to Jes, who will kick off today's session, and we will do the presentation, and then we will have time for a Q&A as well. So feel free to drop questions in the chat. Jes, you can take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Like maybe said, I'm Jes. I'm one of the co-founders of Rise. I'm going to jump right in, but please, please, please utilize the chat. If you have any general thoughts, drop things out there. I have a couple prompts as well. And then if you have any questions that you want to get answered either during or at the end of the presentation, please use the Q&A function. With that, I'm going to share my screen. I've turned my computer on mute, so nobody should interrupt us. Though I will warn you, I have a almost 2-year-old at home. You will hear her screeching or hollering or something in the background, so please just bear with me. So I'd love to just know how you're all doing today. Everybody's calling in from different places. I am based in Valencia, Spain, but originally from New Hampshire through New York City. My emoji is the scream face. I am exhausted. My child is sick. Life has been a little wild. So just drop an emoji in the chat. Let me see how you're doing, how you're feeling. Oh, a nice warm happy face from Bridget. Nice to see that. I appreciate that. Send some good vibes melting. I feel that as well. Thumbs up. Great. So no matter what you're feeling, where you're at, just take a deep breath. There's a lot of serious stuff in here. There's a lot of nice stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's like gonna be like, oh, cool, that data helps me. And there's a lot of stuff that's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. So wherever you're at, process it and or think about it. Maybe is also going to send out a copy of this deck so you will have access to it as well. So just like getting started, real talk, if you are in the people enablement, ERGs, culture space, things might be feeling really tough for you right now, particularly if you are based in the US. Politically, no matter what you believe, things are up and down and all around, returning to office, returning to work, layoffs. So, acknowledgement that all of that is going on. So what we're going to talk about today is the current ERG landscape and some global benchmarks. Every year I run a ERG survey to understand the current state of what's going on with employee resource groups, ERGs. We're going to chat really quickly about what does C-suite actually want, where to even focus your programming, thinking about wrapping up 2025 and going into 2026. Quick math on how your ERGs can save your organization $250K a year, which is backed by data and with math that you can actually use. That's not complicated. And then actions you can take for your ERG program. And like I said, hi, I'm Jes, co-founder of the Rise Journey. We do DEI and HR organizational development consulting. And everything in the ERG report follows the trends of what we're seeing in the consulting space too. So again, real talk, morale is at an all-time low. This is a quote from the survey, which the report should be coming out at the end of the month, pending my childcare. So I just want to read this out loud. Leadership at my organization wants inclusion without having to change anything on their end. They are satisfied laying that responsibility on already marginalized populations rather than face the changes they need to make. This is sadly a consistent theme. ERGs, and you'll see in here, are sometimes funded, they're sometimes well-funded, but more often than not, they're not. They're given the bare minimum and expected to do a lot with it. There's a lot of other ERG thought partners and influencers in the space. If you're in this space, there's talk about whether ERG should be contributing to the business case or not. Should there even be business resource groups or not? That's not what today is about, but to just share the data around this and hopefully help people make stronger choices for their programs. So looking at the benchmarks, white is in the chart on the right-hand side. White is 2025, teal is 2023, and light blue is 2022. Note 2024, I had a baby and the report did not get done, or the survey didn't get done. So there is a gap in the year. We're changing the cadence so that we'll be doing the survey in the same year that the report comes out. So 2026 survey will be coming out in Q1 of 2026. So keep your ears peeled. What this chart is showing us is that the themes, the demographics of the ERGs, LGBTQIA, women, and Black and African American, or Black and African, still are 1, 2, and 3 in terms of most common amongst orgs. And 4, 5, and 6 are Latin, Hispanic, ANHPI, Asian, and disability. And so those year over year have been consistent. The number of organizations with these groups is growing, and that's what this data is showing on the right. In terms of most populated, that's what these groups are. And then we're also seeing that ERGs are still pretty young. 56% of organizations say their ERGs have been created in the last 5 years. So these programs are still growing, they're still evolving, they're still finding their footing. It's not always easy to get a program off the ground and make it popular. A previous organization started ERGs. There's often a big influx in the first year or two, and then things start to kind of temper a little bit and quiet down, and maybe the original leaders leave. So figuring out your program and how it matures is a huge part of some of the pain points that we're seeing here, and how they're integrated really within an organization and becoming symbiotic within that organization. So we're looking at the benchmarks. How all of this got started is I was at an organization running the ERGs and was said, hey, like our leads are doing a lot of work. Why are they not compensated in some way? And my boss said, go figure out who's compensating why. At that point, that was 2019, and I believe it was JustWorks, Twitter, and Uber that were compensating their leads at that point. Maybe LinkedIn was one of the 4 companies that had articles out. I couldn't find any data, so I started the survey. And so the original piece of data was that only 6% of organizations compensated their leads. You can see this has ebbed and flowed over time. A big part of the 2025 data that was a real struggle for me personally was getting respondents. We had about 60 fewer respondents than in 2023, even though I was able to email about double or triple, or reach out to about double or triple of the number of people to get what should have been the equal amount of respondents. I chalk this up to there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of nervousness about, hey, is this actually going to be tracked? Is this actually anonymous when Jes says it is anonymous? Or is somebody going to come knocking down our door? Are we going to get in trouble with the government? What's going on with executive orders? And so that's what I attribute to the lesser amount of data within that. Additionally, this year, the organization skewed a little bit larger. And so larger organizations tend to be a little bit slower when it comes to the compensation piece. For the organizations that did compensate leads with cash, this could be a bonus, it could be a gift card, it could be cash in their paycheck. 39% have consulted with the Fair Standards Labor Act, again, US-based data for the most part, though it is global survey, and 32% would like to. This is pretty basic. If you're paying employees for something other than the 9-to-5 job or whatever job they are paid to do, then you need to make sure you're checking in with compliance and your legal team. 64% pay of organizations pay their leads equally. So this means if John earns $50 a month for his ERG work, so does Jane. Just means it's across the board. This isn't based on, hey, the pride group is bigger than the black group or anything like that. It's equal across the board. And the most common compensation was between $1,500 and $5,000 annually per lead, which is actually, I think, a pretty decent amount. I think the big thing I always like to, my soapbox here is why it's important to compensate leads. The big piece is it is extra work. If any of you have been ERG leads, if any of you work with ERG leads, you know it's extra work. You know how much extra work it is. The report tracks hours and how many hours year over year folks are contributing weekly to this work. Oftentimes, leads are underrepresented groups in the workplace, whether they are women or black or have intersectional identities that lower them down the compensation, equitable compensation food chain. They're probably getting underpaid compared to their white male counterparts. Most organizations aren't doing annual or once every other year equitable compensation checking, making sure their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted. And so if you are a woman of color, you are probably getting underpaid compared to your white male counterparts. It's that much more important to get paid for the ERG work you're doing to help balance things out a little bit. And asking people to do work without pay is really kind of shitty, point blank. Additionally, if your organization can't pay, won't pay, has that blocker, what you need to make sure you do is that you're adding ERG work to performance reviews so that it's getting counted in the work they're doing. It should be part of performance and raise conversations. Hey, this person is working with budgets. They don't get to work with budgets in their everyday job, but they have this experience. That should be part of the qualifications for their next promotion they get. But thinking about other ways to make it connect to compensation is big. So identity only spaces. You maybe asked me when we were putting together kind of the initial ideas around this presentation. She asked me what's going on with identity only spaces. And identity only spaces are, I identify with a woman. As a woman, are there spaces that only cater to women? And sometimes the workplaces have them, some don't. And you can see here the year-over-year data. The yes currently has stayed about even, around 55, between 55 and 65% year over year. It's down a little bit this year. And the no, not planning to has increased pretty dramatically. Again, with the political situation in the US, this doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of fear of, okay, if we make only identifier spaces, is that exclusionary to everyone else? And so what is this balance of how do we create space for folks to talk about and be one of their identities versus a space for everybody to be involved? And 1000%, there should always be space for everybody, allies and identifiers alike, but having identifier only spaces is vital. No matter what the identity is, if that's men, if that's women, if that's parents, if that's disability, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But having a space where you can connect is vital. And there's this great book out by Claude Steele called Whistling Vivaldi and Other Clues on How Stereotypes Affect Us. Really great book. Highly recommend reading it, or at least skimming it, or reading the Cliff Notes or the Goodreads notes. But when you have identity only spaces, it should feel very familiar to you. The feeling of tokenism or being alone is much less likely. There's a greater sense of belonging and safety and shared experience. There's a lowered mental load. Like when we used to have a lot of conversations about code switching, being your authentic self in the workplace. These all connect back to not all the time identifier only spaces, but some of the time or occasionally, and having those be protected in the workplace. Talking about budgets. So one thing, my caveat is my data, I get about 200 respondents to 250 respondents a year for my data. So it is to be taken with a grain of salt because it is a small sample size. Every year I push it further and further and we get broader and broader sample sizes, which is always really exciting. But one thing that stays the same is these marks, the orange, yellow, and green tend to be pretty consistent year over year. The cells that I've filled in orange and yellow kind of make me want to sigh and just roll my eyes a little bit. If you have an ERG program, it should be funded. There should be zero reason that the budget for these programs is unknown. It needs to be really clear. It can be, hey, our ERG programs have budget, and even if it's nominal, such as 100 to 500 per ERG, it needs to be written somewhere so folks know. The orange data is, don't feel super great about it, and the green data is, okay, we're in the right direction. Just so you know how to read this chart, the columns are the different budget sizes for all ERGs in that program, not a singular ERG, but all ERGs. And the rows, you can see the company size, 1 to 250, 250 to 1,000, so on and so forth. And then in parentheses below is another data point of the average number of ERGs that cohort of employees had. So for the companies that had 1 to 250 employees, they averaged having 4 ERGs. And so when you go over on that first row to that green cell that says 10,000 to 20,000 is the overall budget, well, if you have 4 ERGs and your budget is 20,000, that means each ERG gets 5K a year. That's pretty reasonable in my opinion for a 0 to 250% company. That's starting to be the point where you say, okay, how can we get that increased year over year a little bit more? But as you see, the next one, 7 ERGs average, 7 ERGs average, the numbers should be scaling up the more ERGs you have. And it does cap out at more than 50,000. So you can see some of these larger organizations, it might not be as clear what their budgets are. So I have a bunch of quotes. I'm not going to read all of them, but I do want to give time for folks to look at them again. Maybe we'll be able to send out the deck afterwards. We asked about how political changes, how political influence was impacting the organizations. And we got back some really kind of scary and here in red remarks, all the way from positive remarks. So in this case, the organization dismantled DEI. They scrubbed the websites that mentioned DEI. ERGs have not been mentioned, and one ERG member and or lead requested to be removed from any websites. So the extreme, if you work with government partners, if you work with any partner that gets budget or money from the government, grants, this makes a lot of sense. It's really scary if you work again in DEI or your ERGs or you're an underrepresented minority in the workplace. But it isn't that surprising. On the other end of the spectrum, our CEO stated that in our company meeting that we're continuing to support DEI, and it's still a smart thing to do from a strategy perspective to build the best company for the future. So hopefully the companies and the organizations that were saying DEI is important to us, we're putting it on our website, we're making sure we're checking our numbers, board numbers, our employee data, and make sure that we're a representative of the places we live. This is still important. If you look at the numbers of organizations that are reporting on their demographic data now, it has gone down pretty dramatically, particularly the top 500 and top 1,000 organizations that from the Biden administration had a lot of push to post their demographic information, have since taken it down. So we are seeing a lot of flip-flopping and going back on what previously may have been said. And then in the middle, some concerning, there have been some all-out attacks, and there's a chilling effect and a reluctance to engage. So just take a second and think about your organization, where you might fall on the spectrum. For some things you fall in the red versus others in the green. Know that it is all normal. Across the board, things are a little scary for folks. Yeah, Erin in the chat just noted, if DEI ERG morale was a stock, I would buy it all now. I agree on that one, Erin. So the why I put this slide up is I want to normalize wherever your organization is, it's normal. And it's in flux, and it might continue to be in flux. And obviously, as someone who is a DEI practitioner, who has been an ERG lead, who has run ERGs, I hope that more organizations lean toward this green side of this spectrum, that they're talking about, maybe they're a little quieter about their DEI, their ERGs, but they're still continuing the programming. And we do hear of a lot of organizations that say, hey, we need to just rename everything. We're keeping it the same, but we just need to rename it. We're going to name it equity and inclusion, or we're going to just remove those letters and call it, oh gosh, I forgot whatever SHRM has decided they're calling it nowadays. Not that anybody should be listening to SHRM anymore, but it might go through a rebrand. And those things are okay. They're normal. DEI was part of equal opportunity long before it was DEI on its own, and it'll go through another change and rebrand again. So just note wherever you are, it's okay, and take a deep breath. So talking about what we actually know. So what does C-suite actually want? I get this question all the time, like, well, what do we need to do to make our C-suite happy or to get budget? And really within that, what are the most effective ways to understand and measure what matters? Not just to your C-suite, but to your team, to your employees, all of these pieces. But particularly if you want budget, C-suite's got to approve it. So first, want to look at these benchmarks. 49% of respondents said their C-suite want ERGs to create internal community at the organization. And to me, what this means is Slack groups or team groups or Google, whatever their new program launched is. This means meetings. This means having internal events. This means connection. This means saying, wow, I really connected with Dumaybe at our team event, and from which the ERG held, and this makes me feel better about being at this organization. A lot of it is that belonging feeling, as that community piece. 30% wanted ERGs to host internal educational events. This means speakers, formal education, facilitations, not limited to those things, but to get an idea. So a third of folks wanted that. Please note that as these 4 items come up, there's I don't know if you can see me or not, but I have a pretty big Venn diagram of, that 30% could sit in that 49% of internal community within that organization. It might be part of it. So there's a lot of Venn diagrams in here, which is good news because, multiple birds, one stone, for a PETA unfriendly phrase. 29% want to see overall employee participation in ERGs. So when we talked about identifier-only spaces, this means really bringing in the ally piece as well, saying, hey, everybody is welcome to that. We want to identify caretaker or whatever to join too. Um, Seeing generational pieces to this also is really important. You know, when you look at your who's attending your ERG events, is it all people under 30? Is it all people over 60? Is it all Republicans? Is it all Democrats? Is it all caretakers? Thinking about how you might spread to get a larger participation across the organization. And then 15% said they don't know what their C-suite wants. I asked folks for their top three. And this continues to be a pretty solid, it's actually gone down a little bit this year. And for those who facilitate ERG programming and support ERGs or culture, getting your C-suite to say, hey, these are my top three. You might give them a list. You might say, here's the list that just published in the survey. Check off your top three here, or put these five in order, whatever it is. And just getting that written down, they, C-suite, might not know off the top of their head what their priorities are. So if you can give them options and say, hey, which of these would make the most impact on our bottom line? Which of these would make the most impact to recruitment? Which of these would make the most impact to our product? Whatever it is, which would help our survey scores go up? And get those, and then you can start helping ERGs put their events and programming in line with these priorities. And then you can go and say, hey, 92% of our ERG programming helped create internal community, and we were able to prove it with a survey. 90% helped create internal education. And so then you can go to at the end of the year and have kind of like an ERG wrap up, said, hey, we asked you priorities in January, here's what we said in December, and here's how we matched them. We would like more budget to do it again next year. Thinking like that, and really strategic. Most likely, the programming you're already doing covers a lot of these. And so it's really about the storytelling aspect of how you're getting this point across. How are you getting folks, and particularly C-suite, to really buy in? And again, if you have any questions, it could be personal to your organization, it could be general that you want to drop in that Q&A. I love ending these with like real stories, what's going on with your organization versus the presentation I'm doing here. So please, please, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We will keep it anonymous if we can, or ask a friend or whatnot. So top engagement measures. So the first one is meeting participation. So these are the top measures that organizations are using to say, hey, our ERG program was a success and we're measuring it by blank. So the first one is meeting participation, specifically for ERG members who attended. Now again, ERG members doesn't mean they have to be identifiers. It can be identifiers or in-group members and allies, but these are folks who say, I'm a member of this ERG. If you are not tracking membership, programs and software like Jes are a great way to do that. If you have Slack or another similar communication tool, saying, hey, anybody in this group is going to be considered a member. If they mark it off in your HRIS platform, whatever it is, tracking membership. So then you can say, hey, we're tracking. For every meeting we had, 92% of members attended the meeting. And for every event we average between 70 and 80% of members attending an event. Those are really great numbers to be able to boom, put out there. And you can track them pretty easily once you have that overall membership list. You might be pulling this from a Zoom webinar participant list. You might be pulling this from, Google or a Slack event, or, seeing who tuned in. There are tools, bit.ly links, clicks, all of those kinds of things. So really, again, are ERG members getting together, and is it consistent? Next one is 44% are using event participation, again, for ERG members specifically. So the first one is meeting participation. This is events, so programming. Same thing, our ERG members showing up to events. They might say, hey, it's really important for me to do an educational event, or I really want to hear the speaker, but are they actually showing up? Are they bringing other folks? Are they, boosting the numbers? And this is a big one. Are folks actually showing up? And the next one is 32% are using DEI programming participation for the entire organization. So again, not necessarily marking allies, identifiers, or, but everybody in between. So are employees showing up? Is attendance consistent or growing? Are the general population interested in these topics? This is where there might be kickback, again, depending on who you're following in the ERG influencer world, which often is on LinkedIn or newsletters. Everybody has a different opinion on who ERGs should be catering to. Ultimately, employee resource groups are there for the group they represent. So if you're in a women's group, they're there for the women of the organization. Period, point blank, right there. But at the same time, these groups do exist in the ecosystem of a business. So if the business wasn't there, they wouldn't be there. So there does have to be some symbiotic relationship in here. And this is where you think about the entire organization. Okay, the first, Q1 event we're going to do is only going to be for members, or we're catering to members. Everybody's welcome, but we're only catering to members. Versus Q2, we want to do a panel and we want to have everybody and their mother join. And Q3, we're going to do an intersectional event with another ERG to try to get, a cross section of folks. And then Q4, again, we're going to close out the year with an event that only caters toward members, but everybody is welcome. So knowing and putting a name to that each event, what your audience is important, because if you're measuring entire organization participation, but you're only building out programming for those ERG members in mind, there's going to be a mismatch, and your C-suite might not like that. And so that does impact budget, that does impact resources. Additionally, and I was making this point the other day to an organization I work with, do you want to grow your audience? Is your ERG stagnant? Are the members stagnant? Maybe your leads are like, oh my God, I'm flagging, I'm exhausted. How can I keep doing this? Or I need to drop out soon because I'm going to have a baby, or I have to take care of a family member, or my job is different, or went to a different organization. So really thinking about how you're keeping your membership fresh is really big about collaborating with other ERGs and catering to the entire organization from time to time, allowing kind of fresh folks coming in to join, maybe to become leadership, or to kind of support and cultivate to become leadership, or maybe a different, location. So really thinking about how catering to the entire organization sometimes can really be helpful for the life cycle of your ERG itself. Then overall ERG membership, again, allies, identifiers, both. How many employees are involved? Is that growing or changing? If the organization triples in size, is the membership tripling in size? Different ERGs have different expectations on membership. Again, if you go back to the beginning of the slides here, women, LGBTQIA, and Black are the top three. Are those your largest, if you have those three, are those your top three largest in the organization, or are they the most active, or do they do the most events? So is there any correlation between, those groups and memberships? Oftentimes women groups, because we're approximately 50% of the world's population, tend to be a pretty large group and a large ERG membership, versus veterans and military folks tends to be a smaller one. So, you might not say, hey, every ERG needs to have 20% of the population of the company, but you might say, we want to see the ERG membership grow by 20% year over year, which for military and veterans might be, 4 or 5 members. And again, they don't always have to identify. So thinking about that ERG membership also, again, I can't say it enough, morale is at an all-time low. Erin is buying morale stock in ERGs. Thinking about the leads, making sure that succession planning, that is a word. I feel like since my pregnancy, I've lost half my vocabulary, but succession planning for ERG leads is vital. You don't want a lead hanging on by, the threads there just because they feel like if they leave, the ERG is going to collapse. So thinking about how you're really creating that ecosystem so that folks can ebb and flow, can go in and out, and really support themselves as part of that ecosystem. And by creating more ERG membership, you're able to help on that. And positive survey responses. This might be an engagement survey. This might be a post-event survey. This might be a ad hoc Slack survey. There isn't a specific type of survey, and there's a lot of different ways to survey. But what are your employee sentiments around ERGs and DEI programming? How are these changing year over year? Do ERGs affect employee retention, employee happiness? I do a lot of coaching for I think 4 different organizations for their ERG leads. And I tend to do this quarterly. I'll go in, I'll talk with leads. I'll say, what's going on with your programming? Where are we going? And one of the biggest things I come across, especially in larger organizations, is, well, we don't have access to surveys. We're not allowed to do this because our, L&D team only can do this, or our engagement team can only do this. Say, okay, well, let's go on the ground here. You have an event, you're in London, you do an event in London, 30 people show up. At the event, you can say, hey, who would attend another event like this? Raise your hand for yes, put it down for no. Great, count your hands. And I don't know if you can see me, but I'm raising my hand. Would you attend an event about neurodiversity and being a parent? If this, raise your hand, yes or no, and ask a third question. Note those down, put them in a spreadsheet. That is your survey. You just did it. Fantastic. You have won, you have data, you now can move on. I even say, the questions don't have to be complicated. Did this make you feel like you belonged at the company more? Did this ERG have a positive, make you feel good about being at this event? It can be really simple questions. It doesn't have to be complicated. You personally don't, as a lead, don't have to tie it to retention, but the overall data can help tie to retention. If you do have a survey tool, fantastic, use it. But don't forget that in person, live, everybody raise your virtual hand in the chat if you agree with the statement or not, can go really, really long way. I know I talk a lot. Okay, so we're at the halfway mark here. So what are we focusing on? Um, this is a question I get all the time. And the big thing I, double down on is it's about quality versus quantity. And it's about being strategic and having balance in your programming. I believe, maybe if I'm misquoting you, later this week is talking about impressive and impactful events. And so thinking about how do you have one event that just like people leave and they're just like, wow, like I feel full, I feel great. Like may have been intense, it may have been like very deep programming, but like that was fantastic. And that once a quarter, once a half goes a hell of a lot farther than boom, 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 boom. I don't have time for everything. I can barely check my LinkedIn and my email and get that wrapped around my head, let alone be doing programming and joining 17 things a week. So really being thoughtful, again, strategic and balanced about the programming. And so I do this plate exercise. I've done it a couple different ways depending on what your ERG program's priorities are. Your plate might have 4 quadrants, it might have 5. I really hope it doesn't have 5. I've gotten this down to 3 because I think these are the 3 most important pieces, particularly right now in this climate and particularly this year and or presidential season. Smaller events focusing on what members' wants and needs are. If you don't know what your members' wants and needs are, ask them. You could go to 5 members and just say, hey, we'd love to have a conversation about what your wants and needs are right now. As a parent, as a caretaker, as an LGBT member of the LGBTQIA plus community, as blank, what do you need? Do you need to just have a conversation? Do you need a vent? Do we need to go to one of those places where we can all throw axes and break things? Like, that could be a great event. Personally, I would love to be able to break some shit right now. That would be a great point in my life. My child is very sick and not sleeping well, so like breaking stuff would be really cool for me. Has nothing to do with my work, has nothing to do with anything, but if a member of my ERG lead came to me and asked that, I'd probably say that. And so when we think about members' wants and needs, we're thinking about bringing the focus back to the employee, back to build the employee in the ERG community. It might have absolutely nothing to do with the identity the ERG supports, might have nothing to do with the business, but what do they need? Thinking about initiatives leaning internal. Again, this is kind of thinking not about the business resource group element, but really the employee need and where we're at right now, meeting your folks where they are right now. Think local and don't be afraid to get niche. If you have ERGs where you have different regions or different locations, you might only have 5 people in Denver, but get those 5 people together to do something as part of your ERG, or maybe more regional when folks come together for an on-site, but don't be afraid to think locally and get niche. You want your budget to go stretch as far as it can, so balancing those pieces out. Leveraging institutional knowledge. What has worked for ERGs in the past? What hasn't? Don't be afraid to have the 2nd annual blank or the 3rd annual blank. Warner Music Group is one of the folks I work with, and their Black ERG does an annual cookout, I believe for Juneteenth. And they partner with a lot of other ERGs across LA and have this large in-person cookout. I think they're doing their 3rd annual or 4th annual one now. It's really a wonderful event, and it's something they can bank on every time that works, that leans internal, that supports folks and supports collaboration. And then empower location-based or regional needs. Again, what China, if you have an ERG in China needs, it's very different than what folks in Spain might need versus LA versus Australia. And so really thinking about how those groups work differently and how they might need to be empowered differently or supported differently based on location. That globalization piece is big. So the second one here is thinking about internal and external collaborations. This is really about what your leads have capacity for. Real talk, if you support ERG leads, talk to them and say, 2025 is ending. Where can I support you, or what do you have the ability to do? Where can you step up, or where do you need to take a step back? Thinking about intersectional identities or interests, and this is really where when you bring back of the idea of what does the entire organization need. When I think about neurodiversity and how many people are diagnosed or undiagnosed, how many people support it or how many people have no idea what's going on, there's a huge potential audience that might be neurodiverse or neurodivergent and have no idea or not even know what questions to ask. That if you're a disability ERG or a neurodivergent ERG, that can be a great opportunity to collab with maybe a different group and expand your audience in a broader way. Um, Thinking about other popular ERGs in, again, different regions or locations. Maybe you say, hey, I would love to start a disability ERG in Europe, but I have no idea what's going on. I'm going to partner with the women's ERG chapter in Europe, and we're going to do an event together. Again, cross-pollinate. Again, previous successful initiatives. What has another ERG done that you can say, oh, cool, I'm going to do our variation of this. This happens a lot with mentorship programs or, doing lunches or smaller scale things of like, hey, this group did this, we're going to try it here in this office, or we're going to try it with our ERG. So thinking about what's worked in the past, not just with your ERG, but other ERGs. And again, where can you expand the second annual, the third annual blank, or the every other year piece, or really thinking about expansion and continuity, or we can do this once a quarter versus once a year. If it's working, lean into it. And then the last piece, in-person and local programming. I live in Spain. I used to live in New York. When I lived in New York, I was constantly on the ground. I think 4 nights a week, I was probably out doing events. Granted, I was in my 20s. I was hustling. I was all about that work-life culture and jumping in. And so I was going to in-person local things constantly, whether through my organization or others. This is what I would love to do again in my mid 30s, late 30s. I would love to meet people in person. I am prioritizing things where I can meet people live. And granted, I love that you're all showing up here. I appreciate all 60 folks that are on the call today. But finding the balance of in-person versus virtual. If you're going to have a speaker come in, it may behoove you to do a smaller local gig versus a big global one. Again, that's where that balance comes in. And I really encourage you all, before I encourage you all, again, thinking about what your members value, what's important to them, and does that differ regionally? And consider how folks should leave an event feeling. I want you all leaving this presentation feeling like, wow, that was a lot of information, but I feel like I have a next step. Do you want your folks leaving an event being like, I'm so excited, I'm so happy, I can go home and I get to do this cool baking thing, or I get to hug my children, or I get to, I get to socialize with somebody differently in the workplace tomorrow because we had this lunch? How do you want folks leaving? And so when you think about your ERG's plate, your ERG program plate, how are you balanced on this? This was an exercise I did as part of a workshop. And looking at your previous year's programming, looking at your 2025 programming, where do you fall into this? What might be an outlier? That might be a side dish that's not even on this plate. Are you really heavy on one thing or not the other? And again, the Venn diagram, a lot of these can overlap together, but really thinking about the balance piece. And again, going back to that blue piece, what do your members want and need versus what does your C-suite want them to do versus what do you have budget for? And finding that mix of things. So again, where are your strengths overall, regionally, globally? Is your ERG over-indexed in one area? Is your program over-indexed in one area? And focus the strategy for quality versus quantity. And with that, would love you to drop in the chat. It can be brief, it can be long form. I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a sip of water. Can you just drop in the chat some of your most successful ERG programs from this year? Could be about anything. And I'm mute and sip my water. No successful programming this year? Aaron, I know you. I'm going to pick on you. If you're there, will you drop something in the chat? 4 Juneteenth celebrations. Wow, 4. That's incredible. Back to school drive, supplies for communities. Amazing. Government contractors or ERG was shut down this calendar year. Bridget, I feel you. Drag trivia, pride parades. Okay. So some happy ones, aside from Bridget. Apologies on that front. Professional development series, collaborations. Okay, love seeing this. Pride ball. Oh my gosh, I need a good reason to dress up. Sporting Special Olympics, Pride panel highlighting career journeys for folks in the group. So Diversity speaker series. Love this. Juneteenth. Duolingo challenge. Oh gosh. Brave and Badgers. Okay, more are coming in. Keep them coming in. Keep dropping them in the chat. Please. Do maybe we'll also send these around. Again, she'll anonymize them as needed. In the report that's coming out, in fingers crossed, end of October, I'm going to be sharing. This was one of the questions I asked in the chat for qualitative answers for folks to share, and it's really, really important for this community who's on this call, who's not on this call, who's signed up, who's subscribed to all of Chezzy's publications, to all the other ERG influencers' publications, to share what is working. Share the wins. I don't know about you right now, but anytime anybody is winning, I want to shout that from the rooftops. I want to share that. I want to see where people can replicate it, can duplicate it, can have the second annual, third annual, fourth annual, whatever it is. It's so important to share the wins. Not only for yourself, because you help hopefully facilitate it or a part of it or witnessed it, but for those who say, I could use a little boost of inspiration. I could use a little bit of extra support. I could really use, to be able to bring back a win to my organization. And the more you share, hey, we did this event. Here's how we marketed it. Here's how we measured it was successful. And here's how I would change if I were to do it again. Just sharing that information. If everybody posted on LinkedIn about this event and said those like 4 things and shared it with the world, or we could create a giant database on Airtable or whatever, and somebody could go in and just drop that and say, oh, wow, I can just pick and choose from this, makes everybody's lives easier. So share the wins, share those great moments. It's really powerful when you see all of this together with, again, everything that's going on in the world. If you're feeling down, to see all of the wins that people are having and all of these successes that people are having, to be able to focus in on the good things is really, really wonderful. Even in really positive times, to be able to focus in on the good things is wonderful. So with that, here are some of, and again, color-coded to each area, here are some of the wins and programming that folks did that filled out the survey. Again, high level, edited for content, but raising money, mashup meetings, doing more intersectional pieces, identity-focused panels for Latinas in tech, employee panels, starting some new ERG onboarding, heritage months and observations, in-group membership meetings, professional development, less formal coffee chats in person, bring your child to work day. I know my kid would love that. ERG is gathered for breakfast before an offsite, informal group lunches, and yoga and journaling. So again, just some high level examples, but making it easier for everybody when you can share, oh, this was what we did. Here's why it was successful. Here's how we measured it. Here's what I would change if I did it in the future. And then this last piece, the business case for ERG budgets. And my caveat, no, none of you, nobody, unless it's literally your job to make the business case for budgets, should have to do this. But it is really important to me and in this data and this report that I am able to empower folks to use it to make positive change. And so I'm going to do some quick math that I believe everybody here at home or at work or wherever you are can do to save your organization at least $250,000 a year using benchmarks and internal data. So first, I want to understand the impact, and you can see these. I have these beautiful little citations at the top that are in the back is backed by real data. Though you can probably chat GPT any data at this point. So use data with caution, check your sources. So Company X here has 250 employees. Right now, or as of last year, the average annual salary for an employee was $62,000. Again, cited, it seemed a little high in my book, but what are you gonna do? The average company has about 13% annual unwanted attrition. So this means folks that they wanted to have stay at the organization left. There's also wanted attrition, but this is what we're talking about, unwanted attrition. This number seemed a little bit low to me, but also in today's current economy, this might be about right. And then that we're going to assume that it takes about 150% of someone's annual salary to recruit, interview, onboard, train, get them a new employee into the system and help build relationships. This relationships thing is really big for me. I really think about, again, when you think about the demographics and why we have employee resource groups to begin with, if your company has 250 employees and only 10% of those folks are Black, so 25 employees, and of those 25 employees, only 3 of them are high level folks and 2 of them leave, what does that say to the rest of the Black employees there? How does that make them feel? Does that make them want to stay or leave? Are those other Black execs that when they go somewhere else, are they going to recruit folks that they know maybe more intimately because of the ERG? So really thinking about how relationships impact the cost of replacing someone. And depending on those hopefully positive relationships, how that might increase the cost of replacing someone. So for this company, the annual unwanted attrition cost is $3 million. It's like 3 million and change. So when these 33 people leave every year, it costs the organization $3 million to replace them. So according to the ERG report for a company with 250 employees, the annual ERG budget per ERG is 5,000, and they average about 4 ERGs, which means the average ERG budget overall is $20,000. So pretty low number, but pretty good, I think, for a company of 250 employees. And so if we're to be able to say, and hopefully prove, and with data and other pieces you can, that ERG programming helps retain 10% of the people who are going to leave. So 33 people were going to leave. The ERG helps retain 3.3 of them. There's a significant savings. So again, 3.3 employees, the unwanted attrition cost is 307,000. You minus that $20,000 budget for those 4 ERGs, which means that you've saved $286,000 in change if ERGs are able to help retain employees based on the work they do. Which again, if after every event you say, hey, raise your hand if this makes you more, events like this make you more likely to stay at the organization. Yes, you can ask that in your annual survey. You can ask that in Slack surveys. Does this impact your want to stay at this organization? Does this positively impact your interest in this organization? Would this change your mind about leaving the organization? Whatever it may be. But you can use the data, and I'm going to go back to these first couple slides because some people are saying, well, 62,000 is too high. Okay, well, look at what the salary is at your organization if you have the data or estimate, or look at the lowest salary at your organization if you don't have access to higher data. Your unwanted attrition data, your HR team should be tracking this. You might be able to do some loose tracking of it. Exit surveys should also help with this. And then 150%, maybe you think that number is too high, lower it down to 100%, lower it down to 75%, or talk to your HR team and say, hey, like, what do you all estimate it costs to replace somebody? So you can play around, put this in an Excel sheet, play around with some numbers and figure out, if your ERG is able to, again, impact even 10% of the folks that were going to leave, what would be your savings at your organization? This is just using the benchmarks at mine, but these numbers can get the savings numbers can get pretty large pretty fast when you're looking at real data and talking to real people. So again, looking at your unwanted attrition costs, some new data says replacing an employee might cost 200% of their annual salary. You're thinking about, how many employees do you have? What is the average salary? If you want to say, hey, I actually want to figure out how many women we're losing, unwanted attrition of women we're losing, or unwanted attrition of blank demographic. Thinking about, does that cost the company more or less money? How many hours does it take to recruit somebody? How many people are in those interviews? I remember interviewing people where you had a panel of 8 folks, each spending an hour on every candidate that comes through. That's a lot of hours. It's a lot of money being spent on interviews. And so hopefully some of the positive of, so now what? How do you stay the course through the current climate? How do you just exist in this world, no matter what you believe, no matter how you're feeling, and keep going and keep doing this work? And I think the big thing is, and this might not be a satisfactory answer, but there is no one right answer, but there are areas you can focus on. And so the first one is understanding your baseline. So the ERG survey, I'm going to have a QR code and a link to drop in the chat, is still open for benchmarking. So you can benchmark your org, and then when the report comes out, you can see where you line up. Know your data. Know what's going on. Know that unwanted attrition data. Know what the cost to replace folks is. Know some of these internal metrics, and you can partner with your HR teams if you aren't HR. Second one is update the C-suite narrative. If you have a C-suite narrative, if you're like, oh, I know that their priorities are blank, blank, and blank, add some metrics to it. If you don't know those priorities, talk to them, find this out. Again, it could just be giving them a list and saying, check off the 2 most important ones, and we're going to focus on that. Help update that narrative with the financial, what is at stake if ERGs aren't properly resourced. If you have that budget of 20,000 and you're saving the company $280,000 a year, say, hey, I can show this, I can prove this, and I would like to use another $40,000 to the ERG budget, and we think we can impact the attrition in these ways. Create that narrative and update it for them. The third one is identify the strengths of your program. Going back to that plate exercise. Pretty simple, you don't need to have a plate to actually do it, but write down, where does your program or each individual ERG index really high? Where are you really strong? Where do you need to grow? Where do you need some support? And double down on what's working. If something isn't working, put it in hibernation mode for the next 6 months or 8 months and focus on what's working and what's really supporting your members. And lastly, and maybe most important, collaboration. ERGs should be collaborating together, especially if you need to stretch budget. Thinking about how you partner with ERGs potentially at other organizations, and have a thought coming up on that in a second. But thinking about how you're addressing intersectionalities, how you're going across audiences, that kind of thing, and really focusing on that. Courtney, I see your question in the chat. I'm going to get to there in just a second. And ultimately, there are no magic answers. You probably all knew that. You're probably all on here hoping there might be a couple. Unfortunately, I don't have any. But the biggest answer I have is take care of yourself. The current climate is not friendly, like I said in the beginning, to ERGs, folks working in this programming. So take care of yourself. Hug ones you love. Text somebody you haven't texted in a while and just say hi, check in, connect with your peers, connect with other folks in this group, share those wins. And again, here's the QR code and the link, and I'm going to drop, or do maybe if we can drop the link in the chat. If you want to benchmark your survey, please feel free to do so. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to fill out. The report should be coming out shortly. We are also launching a beta ERG matchmaking program where, and you'll see it in the survey, you'll be asked to jump in, where we're going to be saying, hey, would you like to be partnered with other ERGs who have other ERGs of a like type in your area? So folks with women's ERGs in New York, we're going to introduce you all together and hopefully you can collaborate together. Again, ways of stretching the budget, focusing on collaboration, thinking about intersectionality, and just meeting some new people, seeing what's out there. And with that, that's me. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Awesome.
See a face.
Thank you so much, Jess. Gauging, kind of looking at the comments and questions in the chat, I think this was really awesome. And again, needed as far as like knowing what's happening, especially in a time where there's so much happening. Couple different questions in the chat, so I want to make sure that we get to all of them. First one is, how do you define ERG membership? Most of our events are open to all, and we have a hard time defining members versus impact/attendance.
Yeah, so I would say if you're going real old school, have a spreadsheet and say, hey, would you consider yourself a member of this organization? A member being someone who attends, who wants to attend regularly events and meetings. You might identify, you might be an ally, and just say like, I have an interest in being in the newsletter. It might be that simple. I want to be on the newsletter of this ERG. It might be a Slack group. If you're in the Slack group, we consider you a member, and you might just say that. And then you have it and you can write it down. If you do use software like Chezi or other software out there, it's obvious. You sign up, you say, I'm in the group, and there you're a member. And then figuring out the attendance of just who shows up compared to who's on that membership list versus who's not. And then you can see how big kind of the impact you're getting.
Yep. Next question is from Courtney. I'm not understanding where ERG programming retaining 10% of people who were going to leave the org came from. How did you try and track the percentage of employees retained to ERG members?
Totally. So that 10% number is just me setting a number as an example. I tend to be ambitious. And so when I was running ERG programs, I felt pretty confident in our ERGs that the ERGs were strong enough to have an impact on retention. And so I think I know for a fact from people I talked to that there were people who would have left the organization sooner had it not been for the ERG program and the relationships they built there. And so in that case, if you can just say at the end of every event or maybe in your annual survey, does the ERG program positively impact your likelihood at staying at this organization? And I am not a wordsmith. You want to talk to your technical writer or your copywriter or your marketing writer, make sure you get that language correct. But essentially asking folks, does ERG programming positively keep you here? Does it make you want to stay here? You might have a toxic boss. You might be in a company that's really struggling. But does the ERG program make you feel like you belong enough or are included enough or safe enough or blank enough that you stay? And in the past, I have felt very positive, and I will go as far as to say I know that our ERG programming retained people who would have otherwise left if that programming hadn't existed. Therefore, I said the number 10% just to put it out there. But if you put it on your survey or whatever, you can then run it and say, okay, 92% of those who identify as members say that ERG programming has a positive influence on them staying in this organization. 32% of the organization who aren't members say that. So you can start to play around with some math. Ultimately, it might be the opposite. You might say, hey, I'm running the math, and this shows us that 7% of people stayed at the organization who may have otherwise left based on that. Or if you look at exit interviews and say, hey, if you ask different questions in exit interviews, folks who are already leaving, they said that the ERG program had a positive impact and they would have left sooner. It is an imperfect science. That is clear. But right now, very little data is actually being used, period. And if you can tell that narrative, it could get you an extra 10, 20, 30K to put into programming. And then as long as you continually measure it and make sure that programming is still satisfactory, if not exemplary, if not like, fuck yeah, do this, like rah, 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 like you can start to tell that narrative and that story.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any other questions, but we have about 3 more minutes. If folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A and we can get them answered before we log
And
off.
And feel free, I am one of like 7 Osrows on the world in the LinkedIn. You can find me, add me. If you have a personal question about your organization, happy to chat. I used to do in-person coffee, again, when I was ambitious and in my 20s, I used to do lots of coffee chats in New York. Now I do virtual coffee chats to just chat through what the hell is going on in life. So if you want to chat with me, no pressure on services or anything like that. Life needs coffee partners or I need more coffee. So it gives me an um, and again, take care of yourselves. You are first before your organization. At the end of the day, you are a person. Take care of yourselves. Give yourself a hug. What is it? You're supposed to hug 6 seconds, 6 to 8 seconds, kiss, like 30 seconds for a hug to get all the good oxytocin. So, like, if you kiss somebody, kiss them for 6 seconds. If you hug somebody, hug them for 30 seconds. Get some good feelings yeah, the report's coming out. So download the report when it comes out. Hopefully, if I can get my shit together at the end of October. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the other sessions hosted by Chesy. And
Cool.
hopefully hear from you soon.
Thank you so much, Jess, and thanks everyone for joining on this Monday. We'll send out the recording as well as the deck, and then I'll also send over Jess's LinkedIn information and contact information if you do want to take her up on a coffee chat. She's wonderful. So thanks again, all. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.